Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we'll be talking about the details of a backdoor known as BRICKSTORM that is being weaponized by hacking groups associated with the People's Republic of China that maintains long-term persistence on VMware VSphere products. VSphere is a component of VMware that allows for the creation and administration of virtual machines. VSphere servers specifically were targeted across multiple different organizations, and the attackers used the BRICKSTORM backdoor to create hidden rogue virtual machines. And with those machines, they were then able to steal cloned snapshots from existing virtual machines, and then from there, steal credentials. BRICKSTORM is incredibly persistent and stealthy, using a SOCKS proxy for lateral movement. SOCKS is a protocol that routes traffic directly through a proxy server, which masks its origin and makes it more difficult to trace. What's interesting is that this backdoor also used DNS over HTTPS. This was to secure domain lookups, making it even more difficult to see what kind of activity the malware was doing. Traditional DNS is not encrypted, which is fine. DNS is really just looking up what websites you're trying to go to in correlation to the IP addresses they have, as computers are better at reading IP addresses and humans are better at reading names, so that's basically a solution to negotiate what those are. It doesn't necessarily need to be encrypted. However, if you are malware, and you're perhaps doing some malicious lookups, it may be beneficial for you to encrypt your DNS traffic, so that it's less likely to be detected and seen. BRICKSTORM is also capable of reinstalling or restarting itself if its operations are disrupted. The BRICKSTORM backdoor has been used in the wild primarily to target and deploy more malware to these VMware machines, but it's also been used to harvest credentials or even cryptographic keys from the environment in which it's in. What makes a backdoor dangerous is that it's a foothold into your environment, a permanent one that a hacker can use at any time, unless you find it and remove it. They can reliably use it to access your system and steal data, and nothing seems to be amiss. BRICKSTORM especially is very stealthy, though in the advisory put out by CISA, it is almost exclusively targeting organizations that use VMware to take advantage of their vSphere systems and steal data from virtual machines. This is obviously a pretty major risk to organizations that are using virtual machines. For some background, a virtual machine is really just a computer running on top of a much larger computer that is running more copies of computers. You connect to your specific machine and treat it like you would a typical work laptop. Usually you connect to a virtual machine using something called a thin client. A thin client looks like a small desktop computer, but really it doesn't actually have any computing resources in it. The only thing it can do is connect to a network, and on that network would lie your virtual machine. On thick clients, which is just a normal computer, you can also download software like VMware Horizon Client, which is a client that allows you to also access a virtual machine over a network. This is pretty common for remote worker setups. So if you could just give people laptops, why would you bother using virtual machines? And there's a lot of advantages to them. One of them is centralized administration and troubleshooting. Your help desk and end-user computing teams have access to a little centralized place to manage all the virtual machines. So if your virtual machine specifically is having a problem, they don't need physical access to your laptop to solve it. They can solve it from that centralized portal. It also makes inventorying those devices easier and potentially even rebuilding them completely if that's what the problem necessitates. It also does allow people, if you're using a bring-your-own-device setup, to, bring their own device and not have too many concerns about what type of that device it is because the virtual machines themselves are still going to be pretty standardized. However, for a hacker, this can be a situation where you've put all your eggs in one basket. If you're centrally managing these virtual machines, and someone who manages those virtual machines or the vSphere server is compromised, attackers now effectively have that same level of access to all of your corporate machines. A snapshot of a VM is basically a version of that machine in one specific state at a point in time. Whatever data, settings, memory, or state that machine was in is effectively copied into a file. The attackers being able to take these files for themselves could be a major issue if they're able to extract data from those snapshots, which is what we've been seeing in the attacks lately that have been utilizing BRICKSTORM. As I suggested earlier, CISA recently put out an advisory about the increase of these BRICKSTORM backdoor attacks, and has warned administrators to run specific news scans that can find it, as well as block traffic like DNS over HTTPS, if that's something you're not using, and I really haven't seen many places use it, and generally just being careful to monitor and be aware of what lies in the edge of your network to ensure that there isn't anything new sending communications home to a hacker overseas. Any exploits or backdoors or malware that targets VMware products are super lucrative because it really does allow such major access to all of these different machines. So something like this is definitely worth putting an advisory over, especially if your environment does use virtual machines extensively. Thank you to CISA for the initial write-up on the BRICKSTORM backdoor, as well as the Hacker News, Reuters, Dark Reading, and Cyberscoop for reporting on the usage of the backdoor as well. And of course, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, and until next time, stay secure.